Hello and welcome back to another episode of Property-Pxrn Stars, the premium property podcast brought to you by your hosts David Lindley.
And I'm Matt Giggs.
And today we have a very special guest. Our star for the day is someone who brings something quite interesting to the table. So what if I could tell you that in estate agency in the UK today, there was somebody who was charging 2.5% plus VAT. They weren't on Rightmove and they have a waiting list of clients to work with them. You'd say, is that fiction? Is it reality? Well, not only is it reality, but I think this is also this very special guest's part-time hobby, because our guest today is Simon Hawkesley, whose LinkedIn profile lists him first and foremost as adventurer. And we've just caught you on the way back from Morocco, where you've been up some bloody big Atlas mountains.
Indeed.
And I read that one of them was the size of Snowdon, balanced on top of Ben Nevis. And then there was a bit of change left in the altitude as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think one of them was Ben Nevis on top of Scafell Pike, on top of Snowdon. So if you look at the three peaks in the UK, add them all together, we're at that height. But if you look at all of them collectively, the ascents that we did across one expedition was higher than summiting Everest from sea level.
Yeah, all right. Well, I did Mam Tor for Do It For Dom, which isn't a mountain, it's classed as a hill. But I did it on a hangover. Don't hear me going on about it, adventurer.
I'd done the three peaks and I was really chuffed with that up until that, just a minute ago.
What,
Scotland, Wales and Ireland?
Yeah.
In England?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
When was that?
About 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Inside 24 hours?
Yes, just.
That is.
So including all the travel, just about wrapped it up.
That is the starting gate. Well, funny enough, 2024 is 100 years since Mallory and Irvine first, or last should I say, attempted to climb Mount Everest. It's their centenary year. So for 2024, I'm planning on going to Tibet and then re-following the steps of Mallory and Irvine up to the base of the North Col. And the reason I want to stop at the base of the North Col, is twofold, but the main reason...
I can think of a few.
It's cold. The main reason is that in 1922, on their first go to attack this 1,000-foot vertical face, that was the first ever mortalities on Everest, and 7 Sherpas died. And in 1924, on the top of the North Col, that was the last photograph of Mallory and Irvine. So, with a pulse. So I've decided maybe that's you kind of look at it but avoid adding to the statistic. 100 years later and somebody yet still...
So for our viewers
who'll
be watching this, now we know who you're referencing.
Oh, right, okay.
Just for the viewer, who are?
Mallory and Irvine. Mm-hmm. So George Mallory and Andrew Irvine were a part of the British reconnaissance team. They were the very, very first pioneers to attempt to summit Mount Everest. And the British Geographical Society set up a team in 1921. They went back as a reconnaissance, 1922 as their first big attempt. 1923 they were raising money, and 1924 all shit went loose because Mallory and Irvine both died. 67 years later in 1999 they finally found Mallory's body on the side of Everest. And interestingly, there was no camera on his person to suggest whether they made it to the summit or not. But Mallory had always said that if he did make the summit of Mount Everest, the one thing, the keepsake he was going to leave behind was a photograph of his wife, Ruth. And his wallet was still in his jacket pocket, including IOUs for shit, for the extras that he hadn't paid for, but no photograph of his wife. But to this day, they've still not found Andrew Irvine's body. But if you think about it, if Mallory was the lead chap and he's turned round and got his camera out and taken a photograph of Andrew Irvine and gone, click, that's you, he's not going to put it in his pocket and say, right, you get yours out. It's freezing up there and they've got no oxygen. So he's just going to go click, give it to Irvine and say, quick, get me too, click. Irvine's not going to give it him back. He's just going to quickly stuff it and they're going to depart. So there's every chance that Irvine's got the camera, or the mystery stays a mystery. But when I was a kid, it was stories of Mallory and Irvine and stories of Ernie Shackleton doing similar things at similar times, but he was aiming for the South Pole, as was Robert Falcon Scott, that I found the most inspirational. So my company, through its many reiterations, ended up being called Mallory Irvine Property Consultants over those two guys. And our strapline is Spirit of Adventure. And interestingly enough, when we do a key handover, rather than giving somebody a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of champagne, which is quite frankly in this day and age meaningless, it's almost a thanks for paying the bill, I give them a bottle of...
Hang on, I'm just going to quickly message the office.
Scrap the flowers. It's a cheap stunt, let's face it. Champagne, who doesn't? So I give them a bottle of Shackleton whiskey and a book saying what makes that bottle of Shackleton whiskey, and it is all about the spirit of adventure. And with my clients, this is reinforced almost from the get-go. Right, we are now on a journey together. We are a team, okay? There's no I in team. There is a you sometimes in other things, but definitely no I in team. And we're going to pull together as a team, and therefore the accountability is ultimately on my shoulders. But unless my clients, the participants to this adventure, don't pull their weight, I tell them from the get-go, we're a bad fit. So they're either fully on in, or we're not in at all.
So when you're not scaling ridiculous mountains, you do find time to sell a few houses.
Yeah.
And I suppose the reason that I was so interested in inviting you on the podcast today is because I think that you're right at the extreme end of the UK property market in that sense. And what you do is very, very interesting and very, very innovative. And I think that even if there are people that are listening to this that don't want to go to such extreme lengths, either up a mountain or in the property market, I think there are principles from the property market bit that can be transposed across the market, the premium markets, sometimes the residential markets, to generate value. And I think it's really interesting the way that you present the business, you pitch the business, and how you conduct the business as well. So let's kind of get into it a little bit, because Mallory Irvine is a very different business to most estate agencies in the UK, isn't it?
Well, the key thing from conventional estate agency to Mallory Irvine as a unique identifier is the fact that we only look after 3 families at any given time. Now, consider one family might have 6 houses. These are wealthy people, but they all know it's that family and 2 other families at any given time. That's it. And with that family, the advantage with that is that family will have offspring and uncles and aunts, and before you know it, you're not looking after just the family that is in residence. You're actually looking after a whole group of people that the only thing that got the commonality is they are somehow related to or friends of that family, and then we become an attraction agent. We become their agent of choice. I'm thinking of selling the house, then just phone Simon, he'll deal with it. That's kind of the world we want to be in. But the advantage with only looking after 3 families is it allows me to go climbing. So the 2 are interlinked, and
But it's not just that. It's not just from a time point of view, is it? It's not because you want to be a part-time estate agent.
Yeah.
There's value, isn't there, in suppressing the supply means that you can raise the price. So if I'm the 4th family that comes along, and hi Simon, will you sell my house, please? You say,
no, you've got to wait.
I've got to wait.
Yeah, go away. How very dare you phone me up? What were you thinking of? Yeah. Where did you say you lived again?
So how do you manage that then? Because that's a really interesting take, and I can't think of many estate agents I've spoken to in the UK that have that perspective. It's a great perspective. Maybe we'll talk about him a little bit on this podcast from the Daniel Priestley book of being oversubscribed. That is grade A material from there. But how did you come to that number of it being 3? How do you manage it? How do you attract the 3 in the first place? How do you keep the supply for the ongoing ones? Talk to me about that. It's really interesting.
That is okay. If we start from the feed backwards, so in comments that I make with the client when we're first engaging, I'll turn around and say, right, the industry average across the whole of the United Kingdom is 1.5%. So if you're paying under 1.5% for the quality of property you've got, question just how much insulation you're putting around the resource you're trying to sell. So if you're trying to sell something at 3 million quid, 4 million pounds, 2 million pounds, something like that, it's so easy to put something on at 2 million pounds and say, oh, do you know what, we're not getting the traction we thought it was. Let's just drop it down to 1.75. And it's a phone call. No, 1.75 is not quite doing it. Should we try 1.5? Yeah, right. Well, if you actually think about what you've just agreed to, you've just pulled your pants down and screwed yourself over for £500,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And so people shouldn't get, this is the seller shouldn't get worried too much about the cost of the transaction itself. They should worry about the very transaction.
As well as that, I think just you've hit a really good point early on. And if you look at value there, so from a perspective of being an agent that's displaying value, you're quite quickly reducing equity and cash, as opposed to actually building the value of that property to the right, to finding the right buyer and doing the work that you've talked to us about off camera.
Yeah.
Is that how you differentiate?
Yeah. Well, all I do is I focus on the 1%. So you're paying 2.5% plus VAT. So on there's two avoidables in that.
Yeah.
The VAT is one avoidable. Sorry, non-avoidables.
Yeah. Yeah. Just edit that.
So we're using this podcast in the HMRC case.
And there, Your Honour.
We'll keep that in the back pocket though.
Yeah.
Don't delete.
Yeah. Mikey. So there are two things, immovables. One is you can't get rid of the VAT. Yeah. And the second thing I say is that on the 2.5%, VAT is not negotiable. Yeah. It's published. It's a published rate. And so 1.5 is your industry average. If you're paying below 1.5, question your sanity. Now let's focus on what does the extra 1% get. Now on 1%, because it's an easy number, it's the easiest thing to monetize. If something's 20 million quid, I'm going to charge you 20 grand over the industry average. Okay? Now 20 grand when you're selling something at 2 million quid suddenly sounds like chicken feed. It doesn't sound like a great deal of money. So to actually give somebody the 20 grand in context with your house is up for 1.2 million, I drop it down to 1.8, my 20 grand's 10% of the 200 grand you're prepared to drop it. So let's insulate the 2 million and don't worry too much about the extra 20 grand you're going to pay me. I've got little black books, I've got clients, I've got access to national estate agents that will do me a favour on the phone to say, who have you got? I can collaborate with these people. Other agents won't collaborate. I don't know why, but they won't. Yeah. So the 1%, it opens them up to what you could call suddenly whole of market. So the way that Mallory Irvine works, which makes us massively different, is that we put ourselves out as collaboration agents. So we end up becoming the, what's that word? Choreographers. We become a choreographer of a sale. So we set up a team, and the team is always the owner and me, and then it becomes the owner and Mallory Irvine and then the buyers as the team gets bigger. But on the choreography, I'll turn around and say, right, okay, what sort of market exposure do you want? Are you interested in a national agency, or are you looking at best of class? And if they say, in what capacity? Say, well, just imagine you started this journey with Mallory Irvine, and then 3 months down the line, you thought, do you know what, I'm not so sure this is working for us. Where would you go to next? If they turn around and say, for example, Savills, I'll say, great, tell you what we'll do. Mallory Irvine and Savills will start on day one together, but you'll only have one fee. You'll have a fee from me, and out of my fee, I'll pay Savills. So don't worry about that. So you're not paying any more than the 2.5, but you are getting 2 for 1. Now, the advantage to me is I've just insulated myself as well as the client. So now, in the event that they want to disinstruct me, where are they going to? Oh, they've already got them. Nobody's going anywhere now because they're already thinking, well, actually, we've already got where we'd gone to.
Alternative. Yeah.
So and then if it's a local, if they say best of class locally, I'll say, right, okay, so let me do my due diligence and come back to you. And then you tell me also who you think is best of independent agent in your area. And 9 times out of 10, we come up with the same name, and I'll say, well, it seemed quite interesting. I've spoken to the CEO there. He's quite happy to jump on board with us. He knows what we do for a living, and the fee proposition's exactly the same. you settle with me, I'll settle with them. And then that's why, as a part of the proposition, on that 2.5% plus VAT, the collaborator gets 1% and we get 1.5%. So if you like, it's a 40-60 split. The 40% they get in cash is also then uplifted by the fact that they get the for sale board, they get the marketing, they get their Rightmove account, they get their Zoopla account, they get it on their personal website, they get it in their window display or whatever they want for it. So to my mind, that's worth another 20% to them, because the fact that I'm actually giving them a chocolate box fronted, fantastic stately home thing with peacocks and swans and lakes, and it's something that they couldn't dream of getting hold of themselves, and they're thinking, this could set us up indefinitely in our area. That has an intrinsic value to them. Reinforced by the fact I've told them that it has an intrinsic value to them, and I've reinforced the point to a point where they would have said, do you know what, I'd have done it for free just to have got the opportunity, and then I'm saying, no, don't do that, because afterwards you will wake up and then go, I think he's just screwed us over. I can't believe it. It starts going down the Mark Twain thing, getting Huckleberry Finn's mates to paint his fence for him. So I want them to go away and go, do you know what, working with Simon was super fair.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, it was really fair, but then there's another intrinsic value that comes to it, because it's a bit like when that property is about to be listed, it's like the circus has arrived in town. And usually if it's an independent agent that's got a great reputation but wants to enter into, selling houses at £1 million, but he's never sold a stately home at £4 million. And then you're saying, right, okay, fine, this is the film crew we're using. Oh, you're not doing it with your phone then? Not at £4 million, no. And this is the interior photographer we're using, as seen in such and such publications. Oh, not on your phone either. No. And on it goes. And then they're thinking, God, we can understand at the 1.5% that they're getting, almost where the 0.5%'s going, because Hollywood's just rocked up to make a presentation for it, and it all seems larger than life. But the thing is that all the nuances from that, and using things like WhatsApp with the client and then the buyer, and bringing them together so they can separately work out if they want to buy the rugs and the stuffed bear in the corner or whatever they want, helps that journey. And my inherent belief also is that estate agents in general, when it comes to the buyer journey, and I'll add, especially in London, when it can be quite turnovery, they give no emphasis on the buyer.
So you think there's a big opportunity there for agents that they're not even considering?
1,000%. And if you think about it, especially in a transient place like London, your seller might be paying your fees. I get that. So therefore, let's be nice to the seller, because you don't want to be disinstructed. Let's make the seller feel super special, and all the usual superlatives that go with keeping the seller keen until you've been paid. But if the seller's moving out of your area, you're never going to see your seller again. The buyer's just arrived. And if the buyer, when the buyer chooses to sell, thinks, I don't care what estate agent I use, but the one I'm not going to use was the wanker that sold me that house because he was rude, he was abrasive, he was only interested in his own money, his own pocket, there was no sales chasing, there was no concierge, he knew we were new to the area but gave us nothing, we're not using him. Everybody else is a lottery apart from him, who was shit. Why would you do such a thing? So I think on nurture journeys, one thing that Mary Irvine is great at is we earn as much money on buyer journeys as we do on seller journeys. So we've got plenty of clients on the books that say, we're out and about scouting for houses at the moment. When we've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 houses, can we engage your services to go and look at them, then do due diligence on them, and then do the negotiation on our behalf for them, and then we'll bill them accordingly. And once they've got that house and they've bought into the area and they're happy, we know 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 25 years down the line, they're going to come back to us to say, actually, circumstances have changed, we want to sell, wouldn't even entertain using anybody else's services, because they believe we are their personal arm to property.
It's such an interesting business model, this. So, so you there, just to sort of start from the beginning, you built on the premise that the average fee is 1.5%, so they're paying 1% over that for everything that comes with you.
Yeah.
So you're in 2.5%, and then that is effectively subbed out to their second agent of choice, so as to insulate yourself from ever being disinstructed, because you've already got the alternative on board. They get 1%. They're very happy because they get the marketing, the listing, the board, and so on.
What's
Saves
genius
you
is
from
that-
having the Rightmove fee as well, because they're paying that, so you don't need to. So therefore, we are building this up with 2.5%, no Rightmove, and then we'll get to the waiting list in a minute. But that is so different to what is the status quo out there. It's super interesting.
There's also something that's I do that is sneaky but ironically cool. If you actually consider that people that own the sort of properties that I sell are usually my age, so you're looking at people in their early 20s. So if I'm 60 next year and my typical audience is my age or half a decade either side of where I am, they're still very much in an analog mindset. So the fact that we do put stuff on and our video production is insane. We are using film crews and not Dave with his VCR type of shit, you know. This is, we're taking
not
it seriously.
knocking Dave with his VCR.
Yeah, I'm sure Dave's great. Dave, if you're listening, we love you. And
Right here.
but not you, not David Lindley. I'll add. Sorry, wrong choice of word. Eric. Let's change it to Eric. So once we do that, but we also do the brochure. And at Mallory Irvine, we get our brochures printed in Italy, and they're A4, but they're hardback. And the shelf life of our brochure must be insane, because we don't create a brochure, we create a book.
Yeah.
And that cost of experience to us might be 400 quid.
Yeah.
But if you're charging £25,000 per million, and you put a house on the market for 3 million quid and it sells, and you've got a fee of 75 grand coming back plus VAT, then that 300 quid coffee table piece that you've created, and if we do 20 books, the buyer keeps one, the seller keeps one, I've got potentially 18 in stock, and of those 18 in stock, when we're doing our open house, every time I've vetted a client and thought they are super motivated to buy and they would be great sellers, we'd be a great fit, it becomes a real take home for them. And then where buyers and sellers amalgamate in my world is identical to stables. So if you can imagine a stable and it's got thoroughbred Arabian stallions in it, so effectively if somebody went on Rightmove or they went onto our website or they went on somewhere and they thought, do you know what, every single property without a doubt that's us, that's where we want to be, we want to be in that stable, then you pitch into that audience. So we won't also drop our shield and think, let's just grab something in just to keep the bills happy.
Do you mean like a low value, low quality?
It's the quality.
Rather
it's the
than...
quality. I would take on a probate. So Mallory Irvine I would take on a complete shithole that some old granny died in. If it was one of our family members and said, Auntie Ethel's just popped her clogs, but she wasn't on the side of the family that did anything any good. Where is it? It's a terraced house in Shitville. I'd say, great, I'll be round next Tuesday and we'll just deal with it. And then it goes on the website, we'll give it everything, but we'll put probate. And then Mallory Irvine will actually mark it off the back of that and say, Mallory Irvine is recognised as selling stately homes. However, we will never turn down a probate. So if a probate comes in of one of our clients, we will go out of our way and the fee basis stays the same. So if we're selling it suddenly at, I don't know, 80 grand in north of Leeds, we will do it for the same fee basis. We're not going to turn around and say we won't get out of bed for less than X. That doesn't count. And they would still get a hardback book, and we would figure out a way of making that hardback book the right story. And we would make that so compelling that when you did the open house on that, we would make it intriguing. Everybody would want to say, why the hell has a company spent so much money on that 80 grand thing up there? We could almost guarantee to spin it at a profit for the client. The client would go, do you know what? Great, the humility is where it should be.
So it's really interesting. I was going to ask you about that as well, because just say there must be a risk that comes with working with families as clients as you do, that they might suddenly say, oh, turns out we've got a portfolio of buy-to-let properties. None of them are anything special, but you're their agent, you're working with them, you say, yep, fine, I'll deal with all of that.
Yeah. And that happened 2 years ago. A guy got in touch with me and he said, it's not actually for me, it's for my stepfather. I said, great, what's he got? He said he wants to offload his portfolio. And I said, where is it? Hull. And it was like, really? What's he got in Hull? 24 HMO shitholes and none of them are licensed. I was like, okay. And I said, an average sale price of a HMO shithole in Hull? He said, oh, they'd range between 15 and 24 grand. And I said, great, get him to call me. And I just thought, right, okay, fine. So the route for me would have been drive up to Hull, go and look at all 24, get an understanding of what's there, find out which one or two are actually of interest, do something with those two, and then go and find best agent of choice in the area, and then just go through, focus on those two. You know, these two are for sale at £1.3 million for those two terraced houses. If you buy those, we'll chuck in another 19.
Can I ask, I mean, obviously you deal with lesser volume because of the model that you've adopted. And how do you combat, let's say, a customer that's changed their mind during the process? Because obviously if you're doing lower volume, one transaction every 6 months may be falling through for various different reasons, which may be out of seller's control. Is there a fee still involved in that process?
So when the client signs up in the first place, we've got 5 strict criteria. And on those, so effectively what they've just done is breach on a criteria in that instance map. So they're not in any particular order, but if you like, criteria 1 would be that their reason to move has to be absolute. So when we're looking at why somebody's going where they're going,
really invest in it, don't you?
Then we turn around and say, right, okay, fine, you know, that's that criteria nicely acknowledged. If somebody turns around to me and says, well, just stick it on the market, if it sells, it sells, if it doesn't, I'll say, oh, great, I'll put you on a waiting list until your priorities shift. But until you're in a situation where you're phoning me up, banging on my door and saying, oh, the house of our dreams has just arrived, if we don't sell this, you know, my life is over as I know it, then the criteria is back on. Number 2 is the house price point has to be realistic. So if somebody turns around and says, yeah, I hear what you say it's worth 2.25 tops, but can we try it at 2.75 because everybody likes to make an offer at this price? No. Why would I do such a thing? I'd rather say offers in excess of 2 million and get you more than 2.25 than put it on at 2.75 and the world needs dogs say, that's far too much. So the price point has to be realistic. The property itself has got to be inspirational for 2 reasons. One, I've got to be able to write about the thing. And secondly, it's got to ping on the page. So when it does go out as a hardback brochure and a digital image, I want people to look at that and think, oh yeah, that's a Mallory Irvine. It's got to be one of ours. It's got to have our signature next to it. And it's a bit like somebody that just sells BMWs. If he stuck a Ferrari on the forecourt, it would look wrong. But equally, if a guy that's just got a sea of Ferraris and then he just chucked in a car, you know, an Audi in between them, he's got no natural audience to it. So you want to be able to make sure that the inspiration's right, but for both the company's brand identity and my own ability to write for it. Number 5, can't remember how many I've said now, is I've got to like the client. And it's really funny because you go around to the client's house and say, right, okay, so you move, it is absolutely bang on, no problems at all there at all. Price point is where we want to be. I've just remembered what number 4 is. Number 4, it's got to be market ready. So I'll go through and I'll give them a list of stuff that has to happen to that house before the photographer could turn up. And if somebody turns around and says, Christ, it's going to take us 3 months to get through that list, brilliant. So I'll get my diary out. We're looking at what, August then, before I come back.
Why is that so important to you?
Because the digital footprint that you give that house becomes its historic window display. And if you give...
That's a really good quote.
Well, it's a fact. That if you give an audience, an armchair audience, the capacity to dismiss something before they've investigated it, then you don't justify your fee or your reason for breathing in property space. And so the other thing that absolutely incenses me is when you go on Rightmove and there's a property on Rightmove, a stately home, and you think that agent doesn't know what he's doing. He's looked out picking that up as a listing. Yeah. Why are there 237 photographs of it? Yeah. And he's taken a photograph like he'd have done a flat, both sides of the same room, both sides of the kitchen, because that's what his lens requires. He's used the same technique in this thing. And the inventory of photography is so intense, nobody has any reason to go and investigate it at all, because there are 237 examples of it on Rightmove photographically, and a really intense video. And what are those 3D?
Like a Matterport.
Yeah, and a Matterport, burglar's dream. Oh great, right, I can work out where all the CCTV cameras are now, that's lucky. And you've let the neighbours know because you've got a sign-ridden car. Why would you do such a thing? Yeah. I didn't even know they're for sale. Oh, do you think it's a divorce? My end of the market, you don't have a sign-ridden car. You have to go under the radar.
Stealth.
Yeah, it's all in stealth, including the photos.
Taking into account those 5 conditions that you've got agreed from the outset.
Yep.
That means the move is definite.
Yeah.
And that you don't really get to a position where you have...
I do.
Okay.
So the move is absolute because the guy has been guaranteed his job in London or Canada or Australia or wherever he's going.
Yeah.
And what he can't control is that company goes bust.
Yeah.
The move is absolute because they're getting divorced and they get so excited when they're decluttering the house for me and they find old memories that they decide to get back together again, you know. And I feel like I was part of that journey for them. It was like, you'd never have found those behind the sofa. That's cool. So in those instances where it's outside of their control and you know it wasn't premeditated that this was going to happen, it wasn't on a whim, the worst possible thing that I can do is sulk and go, well, hang on a minute, or bill them.
Yeah.
And if they've just had bad news job-wise, bad news about anything, and their circumstances change, and then you bill them, they're going to think, what a shit. Now, the key thing is, at this end of the marketplace, they all go to the same Christmas parties.
Yeah.
And Mallory Irvine rocks up, we'll put a house on in the summer, and then so David didn't get the job he was after, his dream job. Do you know what they did? Sent us a bloody bill. Cheeky bastards, won't be using them again. Oh, well, we were thinking of you. Why would you do such a thing?
I think it's the difference between short and long term.
Yeah.
And looking at your bigger picture, your vision, what you're trying to achieve, and understand that at some point, they might talk about you or they might come back.
Yeah. You know? And philosophically, the solution is, they phone up and say, Simon, a bit of a change of circumstance. The job in Australia, whatever the situation might be, has altered course, and therefore, could you now take it back off the market? I'll then say, yep, sure, no problems at all. And then I'll add, look, should you find an alternative job and stuff like that, everything is just in the wings. So for us to go live next time round, it'll be an easy journey for you. And the way in which you choose to deal with the client at that moment is whether you're getting re-instructed.
Can I just take you back to a conversation we had when we walked across here? And not all of the conversation, but this particular part, where you described what our industry are, in terms of, I think you was talking to a former colleague that you used to work with 6 or 7 years ago, and you were talking about what a state agency needs to be or become. You went through the word entertainment. Can you just explain that to me? Because that was the first time I've ever heard anyone discuss. Well, he wasn't getting accused, was he there?
But I was thinking, what did I say?
But anyway, I said
not that bit. Things.
But no, but you used a word which I hadn't used anyone described of our industry.
Okay, so I was having a chat with Sean Newman, who I absolutely adore, and Sean and I started in 1984, Sean started in 1985 in the same branch. So, we've got nearly 40 years together, unless you ask Sean, because he tells you he's 38. So that would be technically impossible.
He looks great for his age.
Well,
38.
Benjamin Button is bound to, isn't he? In 10 years' time, he's going to look about 12 on the trajectory he's on. But he's adorable. And Sean and I used to have, there was just a 4.5-inch brick wall between our two offices, and I remember going into his office one day and he just turned around and said, in one sentence, what do we do for a living? And Sean was going through major recruitment at the time, and he just wanted some sort of strapline.
It's magic.
And I turned around and said, we're in the entertainment industry. And he went, what? And I said, that's our job. That's where our job is going. Our job, when Sean and I started, our job was completely analog, apart from a photocopier. That was as fancy as it got. And we used to spend evenings after work pulling off the little strippy things off the back of the photographs and putting them on our photocopied things. A single photograph, A4 sheet. If it was worth writing about, 2 A4 sheets stapled together. And then suddenly we're in the world that we're in now. So what happened from 2017, 2018, so the last half decade, so to date, is that the appetite for a seller is no longer based on a photocopier and high street frontage. They are expecting that their property entertains an audience on social media. And whether that's through static images through Rightmove and a video supporting on Rightmove, or whether that's through YouTube or any other sort of like digital channel, the expectation is that that's where the real buyers are going to be found. And the amount of pop-ups on TikTok, and my work colleague Freya works for Omaze, and if you actually look at how successful that is as a proposition, the whole thing is social media driven. So Sean and I, half a decade ago were saying, right, okay, this is where we need to go. Yeah. And at the time, I was mentoring Summer Newman. So right from the get-go, it was, right, okay, let's look at things like drones. And Summer and a new boyfriend at the time, Matt, was quite keen on a drone. And I was like, let's ally that to a property. And we did one in a village called Barbie. And it was carnage trying to get it done. But we've got enough of a clip to splice that in with something else. And we thought, well, onto something now. And then if you actually look at walkthrough videos that estate agents are doing now with mobile phones, us in the room have no right to knock what those people are doing. 90% of the industry aren't doing anything. So if somebody's prepared to be brave enough
I agree.
to stick
100%.
a camera on a selfie stick,
go for it.
And brave rejection more than anything, the fear of rejection, and make a bit of a fool of themselves in their mind only, because nobody else thinks they're being foolish. It's their own self-consciousness that does that. And they do a candid visual image of the inside of a house that in 2023, quite frankly, should be the entry level. And I think that if you start wanting to justify higher fees, you've just got to bring a bigger production to the table. And that bigger production in Mallory Irvine's world might be a hardback brochure as a coffee table piece as a souvenir. But it also means that we do bring in film crews, and when we do a video, it's larger than life. But that video, I don't care blowing a budget on a video, because that video is it's valuable to the client and it's valuable to the audience that it attracts. But it's just as valuable to us, because what it does do is it actually creates a kite mark for Mallory Irvine. If we pay these guys the fee, and the fee for us, the way that I look at it, is it's only the difference between flying British Airways or flying British Airways club class. That's the only, you're still flying on British Airways. So what it's not is, I'm not trying to compete with Purple Bricks. Purple Bricks is fantastic. Easy Property, fantastic. Those business models, those flog your house for 99 quid or under nowadays, tenner a week, I think are brilliant, because there are plenty of houses, 3-bed semis next to an Ofsted highly rated school that will sell itself. So you dare to question, do you need an estate agent at all? No, you need a mechanism to get your house on Rightmove. That's all you need. So there is a place for that. But when you get up to specialism and you are into the millions, then to insulate that client from dropping fees down until your house sells, that's where you justify your fee. So in order to put a really engaging video, if you've got a client that has found it on Rightmove because they're in the market for buying a house at 3 million quid, and then they watch your video and they're entertained by it, and then the sheer volume of correspondence they get, which none of it is junk mail, it's not AI retargeting mail, this is personal to them, and then they meet you and it's the same person that's written that they're meeting, then they're given a hardback book as a take home, and they feel where they've just gone to visit is now special because there's a book that demonstrates it must be special. And then the first thing that they get when they get home, because they went on an open house, is an invitation for a private viewing just for themselves, because you want them to go and see the competition, but you want them to know that everybody's interested in this proposition. So you do want an open house where they're all bumping into each other, especially if they go, I saw that fucker at the last one, and I think they put an offer in, bastards.
So this is a really interesting point that you're on two counts. One is the production value element of it. I really agree. It's a bit of a virtuous circle, isn't it? Because the marketing that you do for the property becomes the marketing for you. Absolutely. A kite mark and attracting future clients as well. And yes, it's an investment. It is an investment, and it's an investment in the service and experience of, using your analogy, club class rather than economy. Nothing irks a client more than paying club class. I can't even say that. Shows how much I do that. And flying economy. They can't wrap an economy thing up in a club class price ticket and expect to get away with it. But it is that level of investment, and there is a virtuous circle both for the client and for you as a business. Coming on to the point you were just saying there as well, one of the questions I think that somebody listening to this might ask is, so coming all the way back to the business model, I could understand them listening and saying, is there not a danger of you not getting future clients if the property is marketed online on the traditional channels, on your portals and so on, through XYZ, be it Savills or whoever the other agent is involved in the collaboration? Does that cut you out of future opportunities? So how do you combat that? How do you get your next clients from the work that you do currently?
Okay,
does that make sense?
No, it does, and it's quite interesting because it's actually the laws of reciprocity. So if you take Tim Phillips, is the country homes expert for Savills, and Tim is hilarious. Would I use Tim to sell my own house? Yeah, I love him. He's just a great guy. And Tim also, Savills is horrendously analog. They're awful. But Tim's not. Tim is super digital and he's a great drone pilot and he's funny. He's got charisma and he's a good laugh and I love him. So with Tim though, if Tim was stacked out, Tim would phone me up and say, Simon, I've got too much on my plate. Any chance you could do that one for me? And we'll just reverse the commission levels. I gave it to you, so you get the 40% and I'll get the 60% this time round. I'd turn around to Tim and say, yeah, no problems at all. Laws of reciprocity. Daniel Daggers and I are doing one in the Bishop's Avenue at 10 million quid next Monday. And, in conversations, he classes me as his man in the north, but anything outside of the M25.
He's Watford Gap, isn't
It's like I'm a White Walker from Game of Thrones, I live the other side of the wall. And so, he would turn around and say, if something came his way, and Daniel Daggers would be the first to turn around, because he wants to be global, and say that would be a poor fit for him. So he wouldn't want to do something in, say, Northamptonshire or Leicestershire or Warwickshire or something like that if he didn't feel that he could give the same level of service that he does to his London clients.
Yeah.
So if he phoned me up and said, right, okay, this is the fee proposition that I'm charging, how much of that do you want? Do you want to go and sort it out for me? I'd say, yeah, sure, no problems at all. So that's what happens industry to industry, and this is the advantage with being a collaborative agent. And the collaborative agent thing also is a massive benefit because of my buyer journeys. So because I do buyer journeys and I get lots of buyers turning around and saying, okay, would you represent our interests in the purchase of this? And it might be because they're politically exposed or in their TV personalities or whatever. And they know that if they turned up themselves, they'd be a bit means tested.
Yeah.
So we go and we charge 1% of the acquisition price, or if it's not listed, they've just driven past something. So I've got one at the moment to do for a client. We reckon it's going to be about 2.5 million quid. the person that is the owner of that house doesn't even know a conversation's been had. They're not on the market or anything. I've just got to parachute in and sweet talk the keys off them. If it's listed with an agent though, and then we do a deal and we drop the price from the listed price, the deal is that the client, my buyer, benefits from 80% of that reduction, and Mallory Irvine benefits from 20% of the reduction. So in context, if something was on for £3 million, we tidied it up at 2.5, we've saved £500,000, we'd get £100,000, the client would save £400,000. Now, the advantage that it gives on the world of reciprocity, and to answer your question there, David, is the fact that when I'm phoning up Tim and saying, have you got anything around about £4 million in this geographic area of this such and such square feet, I've got a client in India that's dying to have it. He's a Maharaja, by the way. Oh, that sounds cool. Right, let's see what we've got. Tim then wants to work with me. And so does Knight Frank. And so does anybody else that's in the market for selling stock that my clients might wish to buy. So the worst thing that can happen is they think, you're an estate agent, we're going to now knock your nose out of joint and we're not going to give you any of that information. Of course they are. They want to do a deal.
Yeah.
So then when I turn around and say, can I invite you to collaborate with something, they can remember, he's the same guy that we had all the fun with on the buyer journey. We'd love to.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Is that maturity? I'm not talking about your age, but I mean in terms of like you're looking at a bigger picture, because you understand that you're representing a customer's sale.
Yeah.
The biggest asset usually.
Yeah.
Your job's to maximise the value in the asset and to find the right buyer at the right price. Sometimes to do that, you need to go outside of the four walls.
Yeah.
Having the maturity to understand that and pull that together, instead of it's going to wrap my arms around it and just make sure nobody else gets to touch it. Is that just an industry mindset, or is that just not possible in the lower end, in your opinion? Because obviously you've worked, mate, you're talking about that very high kind of end market.
No, they don't have to have a swan or a peacock for that to be successful. And I'll tell you why. I bought a house in Canada, and the thing that impressed me the most about buying this house in Canada was MLS.
Oh, right, okay.
So on multiple listing services, I met this woman called Carol in a hotel. Sounds like the story's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, we're going to, again, just keep the button ready. Yeah.
It's not before 9 o'clock. And she'd chosen 5 properties for me to go and look at. And we were at breakfast looking at these 5 properties. And I turned around and said, well, what do you think? I don't know this area at all. What's your view? And she said, I've no idea. We'll look at them together and then we'll have a conversation. I went, what? Haven't you seen any of these 5? And she said, no, none of them are my listings. And it transpired that none of them were anybody's listings. Somebody called Anne Cook had got property A, Philip Smith had got property B, Dave Green had got property. They were different listers in different areas of what I was looking at. But Carol was particularly good at finding buyers. And the way that they do it is a list of lists, buyer brokers take buyers round and they go 50-50 on a high fee. And I think they were charging about 8%. And the lister got 4% for putting the house on the MLS system. And the broker who found a buyer to buy it got the other 4% for actually closing the deal. And I thought, this is insanely good. Well, quite frankly, I was looking at shitholes in Canada as fixer-uppers, because back in the day, you could buy one of these, a Cape Cod clapboard house for about 10 grand. And I thought, God, they're fantastic. And they're on the beach and this is lovely, covered in woodworm and bears knock them down and raccoons. And ignoring a few negatives, I thought it's got to be worth a pop. And then when I looked at their business model, I came back and thought, do you know what? We could be doing that in the UK. So I love the idea, and especially then more than now, perhaps, but back in an analog day where everybody was on telephones only, but no mobiles when my job started.
Yeah.
It was like the phone out, they were using call boxes down the street or their home phones and stuff like that. You just had your little hot box. Well, if you ran out, it probably comes on the market, you ran out your hot box, are you incapable of walking down the high street to the other agents and saying, anybody got a 3-bed semi in Shakespeare Gardens?
Yeah.
Something for that. Fuck off. It was never going to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas if you turn around and say, I've agreed 8% commission on a 3-bed semi in Shakespeare Gardens, have you got to buy for it? I'll give you 4%. Well, all right. Oh, you've got 3. That's lucky. Right, send them all round. Boom. Why can't that happen? Why? Because our fee structure is so prohibitive at the bottom end. There's that race to the bottom on fees that it doesn't allow us to be that generous in conversation. Now, I love the idea, Mark Burgess, our lad, doesn't, that if you put the house on a market and you fail to sell it, you couldn't then open it up to whole of market. Mark Burgess's attitude is you put a house on the market, you fail to sell it, you shit. That's your go over. And I do get that, but it really depends on the relationship you've got with the client. So if the relationship is strong, but you've exhausted your route.
You talked earlier, sorry Simon, you talked earlier about the price coming down being the first strategy.
Everybody's first strategy,
So the first strategy might be, David, what do you think? Have you got someone for it, and it's that kind of like, who do we work for in the end? And I just think there's a different mindset in the upper end and the upper quarter.
And like you said, just, financially, there's more to go around, isn't there?
It's the bigger
There's
pie.
more to go around, there are fewer clients, and therefore a bit of a collaborative approach makes more sense.
And actually on that, there's a valid point there. So I don't think it's maturity, I just think it's that the fee structure allows you the ability to be generous in conversation. However, I have been upset in the past on collaborations when somebody hasn't actually monetized what they're going to get back.
Sure.
So if you've got something for say 2 million quid and you've offered somebody 1% to collaborate, they're getting £20,000. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, £20,000 is £20,000. It's a lot of money. And if they then do fuck all for their 1% other than stick it on Rightmove and wait for the phone to ring, and then they're thinking, well, the relationships between the client is so much with Simon, and now the relationship with the buyer and the client and Simon is so tight, we wouldn't dare interfere with that. Isn't that bloody convenient? So suddenly I do all the heavy lifting, all the way through the memorandum of sale. I'm handing over my bottle of Shackleton whiskey and my book on Shackleton and whatever adventurous stuff I'm doing, and then I'm writing a cheque for £20,000. I could end up writing that cheque for £20,000 and they turn around and say, hang on a minute, you haven't given us 1%, you've given us 1% including VAT, that's only 0.82%. You said 1%, we want 20 grand plus VAT. And I'm thinking, you've never earned 20 grand in your fucking lives on a property. For starters, this is the biggest case size you've ever had. You've got all the marketing, so you've got the ability to buy something else, and you now want the plus VAT on something in the grand scheme of things you didn't lift a finger to do. And when you get the view that, we did do the brochure. No, you did the brochure so it was actually in your company's name, but my company spent £5,000 on the images that we gave to you to populate your brochure. That's when it's raw. So sometimes this obsession that estate agents have got with fees, and they base it on percentages, sometimes they should actually monetize that number and consider, do they genuinely justify charging anybody that amount? So if I went to look at a house at 100 grand or 10 million pounds, it makes no difference. In my head, I'm thinking, right, do I justify the reward that my company's going to get and the time and the effort that we're going to put into that? And if I've only got 3 families, this is my full-time job. Is there a justification there? Whereas I can look at a run-of-the-mill mainstream estate agent on a 3-bed semi in a normal urban town, and the 3-bed semi is up for 250 grand, and I think, do you know what? They cannot justify 1%. They are shit.
So I get the feeling there's a bone to pick there somewhere.
No, it's a fact. It's a fact.
A question
you have to work it backwards. 1% of 250 grand is still costing that client that amount of money. They're still getting a bill.
Well, I was going to ask you a question on the business model per se, and not a question to be answered kind of specifically, but somebody listening to this. So we said you're at the extreme end of a market here, dealing in small quantities of customers, not necessarily the units. But if I could sort of phrase a question this way, like, does Simon want to limit it to 3 families because he prefers to spend his time climbing and doing everything else? Or if you wanted this to be, could this be rewarding enough to be a completely full-time occupation for you at 3 families? Or is it designed to be 3 families to afford you time to do the things that you like to do? So what I'm asking there is sort of, if somebody is thinking about the next stage in their career and what they're going to do and what your advice would be, is that the right number to go at, or is it a low number to afford you the additional time? Does the question make sense?
No, it does. It makes sense, and it's a really good question, and there's a comprehensive answer coming up. So imagine you get 2 estate agents sitting in a pub, and one of them is boasting of the fact that he's got 42 properties on the books himself, okay, and he's charging 1.5%. If you actually look at the maths on that, if he's got 42 houses on the books, and let's just say they're mid-range houses, so that's irrelevant, it's just those numbers, the 42 houses, it means that guy cannot dedicate more than 3/4 of 1 day per month per property. And if one of those properties requires 3 or 4 days work because they're a bit high maintenance, how much time are the other 41 properties getting out of this guy? Yeah. Either get half a day a month, quarter of a day a month. So where's the justification in the fee? How can he charge 1.5% if he's giving a client quarter of a day a month as the maximum he could do? And if he gives them any more than that, somebody else is a victim because he's not giving them any time at all. Yeah, that's insane. So what I did was I worked the whole thing backwards and said, right, if I have 3 families, and let's just say that was a property each, and let's say typically there's 30 days in a month, so ignore February and the stuff that goes out of sync, just to keep the sum simple, that means that I could dedicate 10 days per property as a mean figure per month. And then I looked at 10 days, take the weekends out of that, and thinking, right, okay, that's still kind of 1.5 weeks of property. Does that justify the extra 1%, or does it justify 2.5% plus VAT? Yeah, of course it does. And then the comment that Matt made earlier, the what if comment, what if 2/3 of the way through a cycle, a client decides their circumstances have changed, they've got to stay, I also have to factor that risk in. Yeah. So if I've got 3 properties on the go, one property might take me 2 years to sell. But if I've committed to only 3 properties and all 3 properties take 2 years to sell, or one of them bails, okay, I might be charging £75,000 per property, but over 2 years, I haven't necessarily got rich. What I have got is wise with my time, because to earn £150,000 a year flogging houses, I think any decent estate agent could do as a numbers game, okay? You could do that on 3-bed semis next to Ofsted schools, if good quality Ofsted schools, if you've got a decent strategy and a decent proposition to market. But what you've also got then is a guy that's just going to burn out by the time he's 40, because that is a full-time, 7 days a week job running like a headless bloody chicken at the coalface to keep those numbers up to hit 150 grand. I could do that with 3 houses. And the nice thing about doing the 3-house sketch is that when I've got 3 houses that all have come together, so if you look at 2023 being the last calendar end, my last house sold completed on the 1st of December. And therefore that payment went into my account at the last day of the year, but that meant I was starting January the 1st with waiting list of properties, but no engagement. Best Christmas I've had in years. Fantastic bit of climbing done, a lot of hill walking. Got into February and thought, better go back to the coalface now. Boop, 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 boop. Hello, yeah, Happy New Year to you too. Right, so it's your time. And then we're off and away, and then it's like brilliant, start the next journey with the next client and so on and so forth. And then trundle, trundle, trundle. Get to a situation, you get to the end of the quarter and you think, right, just sold another one. The other 2 are slow burners at the moment. They're happy. Phone them up and say, oh, by the way, I'm going climbing, and then I'm going off to my house in France, and then I don't know, I'll be back in June. Yeah, fine, see you in June. Okay. And then now I'm back. I'll then just sort of like smash through 2 big houses and hopefully both of them are completed by December. And I'll think, right, okay, what more do I want out of my career than that?
It's really interesting that around that.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Right, Matt, I think that we've wrung young Simon dry for his
Well,
knowledge
we've had
and
him
wisdom.
for about 3 hours in total today. So,
But nobody leaves here unscathed. And we have a
Scruffy
bit
Hirons.
of... So if anyone who doesn't know what Simon's talking about, it's completely unprompted, everybody, whether they know it or not, has a porn star name. And that is comprised of your pet's name and then your mother's maiden name. First pet.
Yeah.
Yours is?
Scruffy Hirons.
Scruffy Irons?
Scruffy Hirons.
Scruffy Hirons. Pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty
not
good.
as good as Matt's.
Not as good as Matt's.
Kevin Tiny still up there, isn't it?
Kevin Tiny, undefeated.
Tiny Kevin.
Tiny Kevin's on the leaderboard.
What was yours, David?
Mine is very interesting. Mine had a dog called Wonton. And then what was the second part of it? The mother's
Your mum's
maiden name.
maiden name.
Wonton Loveridge. It's not bad, but it's a bit weird. It's Kevin
it's
Tiny.
middle name. It's middle name. It's your middle name.
Edward Wonton then.
There you go.
Eddie Wonton.
So Eddie Wonton. That was what we thought.
No,
Eddie
Kevin
Wonton,
Tiny, is
yeah.
it? So there we go.
Was
So,
that of use to you?
massive. That was the thing that we all came for.
We did. And to listen to someone operating in this marketplace in a completely different way to the majority.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And so we start off this podcast by talking about, is it fiction or is it reality to operate an estate agency business in the UK that is unnegotiatingly 2.5%, which is not on Rightmove and has a waiting list of clients. It's the stuff of make-believe, of dreams, of fantasy, I think, for a lot of people in the UK estate agency industry. But there we are. I've had about an hour together and proven that it can be done. And that's kind of the purpose of the podcast and why we put this on. The Property Porn Stars is to bring people from around the industry, at extreme ends of the industry, to show what can be done if we think a little bit differently about the UK market. And it's not necessarily to say that we all have to jump into that amazing country house exclusive area, but it's to use and utilize some of the positioning from that in our day-to-day estate agency to generate value.
I think really it depends on the watcher, the listener, who's considering where do they want to position themselves in the market by listening to the different guests that we've had. We've had 2 completely different guests today. So
absolutely,
if you've got someone in mind that you'd like to reach out to, we can reach out to, bring on as a guest, then please just let us know.
So Simon, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Top man.
You're very welcome.
And if you've liked what you've heard or even saw, then don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, download, notifications, all that sort of good stuff. And thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode.